Awesome. I'd like to thank you for allowing me into your homes for this 8th edition of Season 3 of Esoteric Science Roundtable. And I would like to start by thanking everyone that took the time to come out to Opal Divines for our metaphysical and philosophical discussion meetings. We had a pretty good turnout, and I would again like to thank everybody that took the time to come out. I would like to mention that we will not be live here for Esoteric Science Roundtable for the following 2 weeks due to Christmas and then the New Year's holiday, and so you will be seeing backup tapes during that time. And I would like to mention, some of you may have already found out actually before I did, that Jeff Contreras has asked me to come on to his show as a guest. Excuse me, as a guest on Tuesday the 30th, the last Tuesday rather, of this month, to come on and further discuss what we've been discussing, which is Christ or the solar savior myths, or however you want to term it, and to kind of have hopefully some productive discourse along those lines. And Jeff's show is every Tuesday at 10 p.m. on Channel 16, so if folks are interested in considering marking their calendars for that event. Okay, so I would like to go ahead and get into today's discussion, and I would like to discuss the mysteries of Christ, and to consider a little bit of recapturing what I spoke of last week, just briefly, and that is to consider the process of initiation, so-called, and to consider the process of evolutionary unfoldment and how that takes place through all the kingdoms in nature, but as humans being self-conscious, and then lives that are greater or more aware, more expansive than our human lives, also take into consideration this evolutionary process, and it has much bearing on how evolution plays out through humanity, and therefore how the lesser kingdoms are lifted up, esoterically speaking, by our actions. And this evolutionary process has always been going on. There has never been a time in the process of creation when there has not been an evolutionary urge moving forward. And that is part and parcel of the creative process and how things play out in the process of creation, from the grandest, vastest levels all the way down to the smallest, most infinite. When we look at the atom, the way that it is structured, it mirrors the patterns of things in the heavens in the way that solar systems work out, and how there is rotation around a central energy point, and that ties in intimately to our human system as well, and how we also are a mirror for these other systems in nature. And all of this analogy that can be made by just simply looking around and looking internally, man, know thyself, the age-old Greek axiom that allows us to have some insight into this process and understand a bit more of how it really does affect the evolutionary process, how it plays out, and how we can play an active, intelligent part in that evolutionary unfoldment. And so for a very long time, for a vast expanse of our human history, there has been in place a process that's called initiation that has allowed certain individuals to move a bit quicker on this evolutionary path, and the whole process of evolution being to refine this human vessel, to refine the lesser component lives that make up not only our human vessel, but make up the lower kingdoms in nature as well, animal, plant, and mineral. And that all these systems are intimately tied together. And so, again, as we intelligently move forward, we can place ourselves into systems of understanding based on divine law, and we can mold ourselves to these patterns that exist and that have existed since time immemorial, that again allow for this unfolding process. And we can see also, if we really look at nature and look and consider how things manifest in this world, that there is a hierarchical structuring to all that. And the pyramid is the prime example. The tetrahedron, which is a four-sided pyramid, basically ties into the building blocks of matter in many ways, that the symbolism of that particular, what's called a solid. it has a lot of implications for us. And so that pyramid idea is an archetype or a basic concept that's way deep in our subconscious. It goes to the very root of human nature and the creative divine unfoldment. And so we, in our human minds, can't help but look to this concept as something that we seek to manifest on the planet. And so we look towards the ancient civilizations that erected pyramidal structures, and we see that that is something that is quite common throughout the ancient cultures, vastly expansive, on vast expansive areas of the globe. It wasn't all in one small location, that we see this paying homage to this structure and what it implies and what it symbolizes for us. And if we understand the mystery tradition, if we follow and study not only comparative religion, which is a key component, and understand the exoteric or the outer or the cultural reasons behind any unfoldment, any dispensation of some new religious concept, how it made its way into manifestation, we can look back again to this initiation process, that it lies back behind all of the religious writings and unfoldings and prophetic statements and indications for man as far as patterns to follow to find one's way back to the divine, which is our common shared source. And so this initiation process was established in order to find the more advanced evolutionary individuals and to get them into this system. And it always by free will. These weren't imposed schools or imposed structures or institutions. There was always a looking for those individuals that were going to fit into, I guess advanced enough would be the term. And in some cases, the young people were set aside really before they could really, I guess, make their own adult consenting decisions. So in some cases, I guess that wouldn't be completely accurate, that the youth were set aside in some instances when they showed exceptional capacities at a very young age. And this is the same process that we use today when we see those that we deem gifted and talented or what have you. It's found its way into expression in our modern society as well. It just applies to a different age, a different culture. And so again, keeping in mind that this evolutionary process has to move forward in order for this refinement of matter to happen in a real fashion. Now, it's not a quick process by any stretch. This is an age-long and extremely long process, and many human lives continue and continue. And that is also part of this as well, that this whole refinement process cannot be established through one lifetime. It takes many, many lifetimes, and we have to consider the idea of karma and reincarnation as a key tenet if we want to consider the hypothesis that I'm trying to establish here, that it is part and parcel of that building process, that refining process, that one finds oneself over and over again, finding oneself in the proper position to make use of what's available to them. And so at a certain point in the evolutionary process, certain individuals are going to demonstrate to those ready guides that watch and look over humanity and seek to serve humanity in their expression and their efforts. They're always looking out for those whose light shines a little brighter than the average person, who are emitting a magnetic potency that will attract the attention, again, of those that selflessly seek to serve the race, and those that have themselves passed through substantial portions of this initiation process so that they have, in our estimation, perfected themselves. Now, the idea of perfection is a relative term because once one has achieved a state of human perfection, there are ever-advancing points and places and states of consciousness that one can aspire to. It's just a matter of that intent and that motivation and that will being implemented to motivate and propel oneself to these lofty goals and these lofty positions. And this unfolding of human evolution constantly takes place as human evolution moves through these ranks, and we find that the human travels and, again, through many lives, finds oneself higher and higher in the evolutionary process once one has established the concept of divinity and been able to start this so-called initiatory process and find one's way back to finding some way back to a path of return to divinity. And again, the path being just a generic term really to explain or describe anyone's seeking once they understand the nature of the soul and they feel motivated enough that they want to bend their life's effort to somehow reuniting that soul energy with what they feel to be a greater, more inclusive aspect of their own individual souls. And so that quest begins once that ignition or the firing of that potency becomes viable and a real living quality or potency inside an individual. And so again, we see that this evolutionary process has unfolded throughout time. If we consider from the days of our our self-conscious expression, that initiation gradually came into play more and more and became a more necessary part of society as we evolved. And we evolved through the physical body at first, and that became more perfected, and then we evolved our emotional body. And now, in this day and age, we work more so on the mental body. And really what's taught in psychology classes in universities is far more advanced than what some of the initiates in the mystery schools were taught, maybe thousands of years ago, because our mental capacity has expanded so drastically and exponentially since those early days that the average person expresses a great capacity compared to the thinking process of some of these ancient individuals. Now, I'm not saying that we were more spiritual overall, because there are different circumstances that reflect themselves and appear in these different cultures. But nonetheless, as far as our mental acuity, we've really progressed considerably in these few thousand years. And we see that demonstrating itself in just the average man and how intelligent, again, just the average person is compared to what was available mentally, sometime in the past. And so again, to consider the process of initiation and how this unfolding plays itself out through myth and symbolism as it expresses itself in, again, various myths, and then religious dispensation. The religious dispensation throughout the ages that has reflected a pattern that is the same pattern that we find time and time again through all the ages, through all their sages, through time immemorial, a repeating, recurring pattern of a man that was born on the 25th of December, was slain for the sins of the world and resurrected after the third day, born of a virgin. All of these, again, recurring symbols that we see tied to all the great solar saviors throughout time. And this ties in intimately to the initiation process. The initiation process and these mystery schools, so-called, were implemented and put into place by, again, these wise guides of the race, that they themselves are human as well. They're just a little more seasoned, a little more traveled along the path, so-called, and so they are like our older brothers in that respect, in that they've been there, so they know the pitfalls, they know some of the shortcomings that we can succumb to, and they see what we may fail to see because of, we can't see the forest for the trees. And so they're able to give a bit of guidance, a bit of advice, and be way showers to a certain degree along the lines, again, of our own free will. And so we make ourselves, we avail ourselves, certain individuals do, at a certain point in their lives, of the opportunity to expand their exchange with these individuals. And so, again, we see the pattern of evolution throughout the ages, that these systems were put into place so that humanity, the cream of the crop really, and if we really want to get down to nuts and bolts, were allowed to go through these particular schools, and how they were trained to the utmost of their capacity so that they could be the most competent and potent servers that they could possibly be. And so the process continues and evolves, and even to this day we see the process of the evolutionary process and the initiation process evolving to fit certain needs. And so certain other solar saviors, and many, their names are legion, have repeated and have their predecessors to Jesus. And this has been repeated time and time again as far as this pattern that we see of the initiations that take place, the baptism, birth baptism, all these things that take place. And it's the final crucifixion where the body is given up, called the Great Renunciation in the East, for some greater expansion of consciousness to take place, and also for this great lesson or example to be shown for the sons of men, for them to follow. Now, the initiation process was put into place by humans, again, given that they were advanced humans nonetheless, but still human, for humans, not for myths, not for mushrooms, but for humans. The initiation process, and there are those that are familiar with it, and there are those that have to just take it as a hypothesis that this potentially may be or may not be. Nonetheless, those that are familiar with the initiation process know that it is for men. Well, I would say men and women. I want to I'm not trying to differentiate in that sense. When I say men, I mean humankind, our mankind, our humanity, the human race, that those individuals, because it's very well regarded also that the mysteries took men and women alike, and so that's one outstanding characteristic, that they were very far ahead of their time back then, and that's they hold that communal brotherhood mentality to this day. But nonetheless, the initiation process is for men to expand their consciousness and to achieve a greater awareness so that they can be more competent servers of the race. And that's ever been the reason for the existence of these schools and this mystery tradition that exists through all cultures, through all ages. It has existed and continues to exist for the uplifting of our humanity. And for men, again, men and women I don't want to beat that point to death too much, but again, for our humanity to go through the ranks of this process and to fulfill this evolution, for it to continue, and to the evolutionary process itself to evolve. That may sound like a paradoxical statement, but nonetheless, the evolutionary process evolves in its own right. And if we follow back these simple initiations and kind of consider how they apply to mankind and how they apply in this day and age, if we consider first the birth of Christ, we consider the birth of Jesus in the manger, or a cave as it's sometimes spoken of symbolically, and then that ties into the other solar saviors, that this, for us in our day and age, ties to the individual who is determined beyond any questioning, that has a firm knowing and affirmation and acknowledgement in their own right, beyond any questioning or any doubt, that they have a soul that is more than their human self, more than this animal nature that we reflect, but that is something that is divine and an immortal aspect of us that we can commune with, that we can acquiesce with, that we can tie in with at some level. And so understanding the soul is considered the birth of Christ in the cave of the heart, and that is related to, again, the birth initiation reflected in the Gospels. Then the baptism. We find baptism by water, or of water, and that is also the point where we find the merging in this respect for the Gospel narratives of Christ with the man Jesus, because there's a description of a dove alighting on the man Jesus, and then this unfolding, subsequent unfolding takes place. And that is a symbolic representation of Christ uniting his consciousness with the man Jesus in a very unique manner. Previously, Christ had overshadowed solar saviors. This is not entirely unique. This had taken place before. But our evolutionary process, as we move forward through through matter and refine it over time, the evolutionary process and the process of Christ merging with our consciousness has altered. And so Christ has truly been able to come closer to humanity than has ever been available previously through these other solar saviors of other times and other cultures. Although the overshadowing took place, it was not to this degree that we see exemplified in the gospel narratives. And then if we consider the transfiguration initiation, this also took place in the past. And this is a reflection in the gospel narratives, that's told in a bit of a unique way that does give it a bit of uniqueness in relation to this initiation, this particular initiation, the third initiation, so-called, or the transfiguration initiation, where there's a transformation of consciousness that takes place, that this initiation has been portrayed previously, but not where the symbolism of Moses being on the one hand of Jesus and Elias being on the other hand. Moses signifying the past, the lawgiver of the past, and what has been accomplished, and the initiatory process up to that point, and then Elias being the way shower, being the prophet, to indicate that this particular dispensation will carry forward into the future. So we see the past and the future portrayed on either side of Jesus through Christ, and this takes on a unique connotation or characteristic that it had not had previously, because Elias is showing that Jesus through Christ is offering a pattern that should be followed far into the future. Not just now for this time in this culture, but that this impulse is so pregnant with spirituality and so unique and so potent and unprecedented that it will be potent enough and right and proper in the grand scheme of things, in the scheme of divine law, that this impulse, this expression, should be carried forward into the future. The previous solar saviors were more regional, were more localized. We don't find the impulse taking off in the sense that this did and being prophesied to be a future dispensation in addition. That's very unique. It seems as though the solar saviors of the past did their little stint in their little areas, and they affected or influenced that pocket of people exclusively, and then that work subsided. Here we see again an acknowledgement that this particular individual's work and what has been achieved in this instance, although it had been done similarly before, was nonetheless unique in that it was going to be the future dispensation as well. And that's something that we would be very helpful to consider in light of this situation. Then if we consider the crucifixion, or again what is known as the renunciation, where there is the release of the physical body, the dying of the man on the cross, or there are other symbols that relate to that after the death of the Savior, and then the subsequent 3 days in the tomb that follows. That's the symbolism is the same. But we also hear in this instance, in specifying Jesus through Christ in particular, that he will be with us even unto the end of the age. And I am paraphrasing a little bit of that Bible verse, but nonetheless it again emphasizing that this is a dispensation or an impulse that's going to have weight or moment or meaning for us in the future, not only at that time 2,000 years ago in Palestine, but for a future dissemination of that impulse and what that would mean, and the implications of that for our humanity. And so also considering, as I said earlier, that initiation is a human process and that it takes place at higher levels as well. And so that also is another key component of what makes this initiation so special in relation to previous aspects of this work. And that is that Christ, in addition to Jesus the man, took an initiation of his own, at his own level of awareness and divinity and understanding. And so there was a simultaneous releasing of energy and a simultaneous expansion of awareness that took place not only in the consciousness of the man Jesus, who was becoming more than a man through this process, through this merging, but also through the divine aspect that was working through and linked through Jesus. And so there was a dual initiation that was accomplished through this amalgamation, through this melding, this planned working out, and this active expression through into physical manifestation, and how this has expressed itself. And so this allowed, at this dual initiation, for there being a further tear, or a rent is another term for that, a ripping or a tearing, essentially, I guess is the best word, a tearing between worlds, or between planes, or between states of consciousness, or whatever term would best appeal to you, that, again, there are barriers or buffers that exist, just like there are buffers that exist between our physical waking day consciousness and the consciousness that we experience at night when we're asleep. There are natural barriers that exist that are set into place, and that's part of our divine expression and unfolding and the evolutionary process. But nonetheless, that part of our evolutionary process is also to refine not only our physical bodies, but the dense physical nature of this planet as well, and that the consciousness, the consciousness indwelling this globe also seeks to improve himself, and seeks to improve and expand and change through this initiation process. Obviously, again, on a much vaster, grander scale than we can even comprehend with our finite physical minds. But nonetheless, we can work at some level of understanding with that greater unfolding process. And as we perfect and pursue those goals, in our own lives, so also are we able to reinforce and lift up the process of the larger workings out, in addition, as I said earlier, to uplifting the lower. And keeping in mind the words, if I be lifted up, will draw all men unto me. That does tie in to that magnetic capacity of what took place during that union between Jesus, through Christ, with the Father in heaven. And this also is the unique aspect in this instance that we can refer back to, and that is that this attaching with the will aspect, or the Father in heaven aspect, was also unprecedented to this degree of penetration, if you want to use that term, or the comprehensive relationship that resulted from that action was unique. Before, there had been the same playings out of these solar saviors. Again, my contention is that there were men in the past that did these great feats. Granted, they likely were not born on the 25th of December. Likely they weren't born of a virgin, and a lot of these other key symbols that we see. But the pattern that's expressed and referred back to time and time again shows for us not only that that is the pattern by which God creates, but that it is, it's basically the way that, it's the way of evolution. It's the way that our minds operate. It shows, it demonstrates, again, the archetypes, or the things that are far back in our consciousness that are like the building blocks of all creation, but that this process does tie in to us at the most intimate levels, and that this reaching for this higher aspects of ourselves, and this evolutionary process of unfolding, how it plays out, continues, again, as I said earlier, to evolve and to change and to bring more refinement to the physical body. Anyone that would argue that man has not evolved in the past 100 years, 1,000 years, 5,000 years, I think that the argument is easy to demonstrate, that there has been evolution that's provable, that's demonstratable, that we can look to hold up that case, make that case firm, that this process does unfold. But that this supreme uniting of the will, and that's essentially what it was. It was a supreme effort of the will of Jesus to unite in the way that he did with the Christ, and also at the same time for Christ to make a closer rapport, or have a closer relationship with the Father in heaven aspect. And this complete submission of will from Jesus all the way through, that this concession or this agreeing took place, that again allowed for this channel to open up, that changed things from that point forward. And that's a key component of this as well, that previous solar saviors would instill a quality of energy or livingness through their actions in their area, but that in this instance, the potency and the vitality with which this took place, again, was unprecedented, and this, the ability or the capacity rather, for, again, the will aspect to penetrate into the physical plane was different. And in addition to all the previous solar saviors, it's like a pool of energy that keeps adding and adding and adding and amalgamating, so that at some point in time, there's a very full pool, and there are a lot of examples to look back to see, again, the pattern of those individuals that have worked their way back to divinity. And so this process refines itself, and we can find the means by which to continue working with that evolutionary trend in mind, that we can still do pioneering work, even though this work has been in place for humanity for time immemorial. We can still be on the cutting edge of new aspects of this, new dispensations, and new and creative ways of working with energy and force, which is in a nutshell what initiation process or the mystery schools taught, how to work with energy and force at some level. But the process evolves, it continues to evolve, and by the culmination of efforts of previous solar saviors and previous good men, holy men, people that lived a righteous life and sought to seek God in their own way, that this building up process over time has allowed for us to be able to take advantage of their efforts. It's like they've paved a path for us, and they've shown the way to such a degree that their early work we don't take for granted, we acknowledge, but we can fly past what they've already done and get into the meat of the matter more so, and get into some real work, and keep in mind the living component, the livingness capacity of Christ. At the crucifixion or the renunciation, the body was relinquished, and a new body was reformed, a body that was perfect, relatively speaking, a body that was generated of light, if you will, not light like that would come from a lamp, but light in the physical sense, that is a substance of angel stuff and what have you. It's a refined substance that can be used in those ways, and so a body of light can be built in that respect. And so many people in this day and age concentrate on the deceased Christ, on Christ on the cross, and the aspect of a blood atonement, that we must worship this man, as you can see, the hands outstretched behind me on the cross. We have to worship this man and keep it and revere the death. And that is not what Christ came here to emphasize to us. He came to emphasize life. These outstretched hands are outstretched in giving to humanity, and in a way to demonstrate, again, the way shower. This is not come to me and worship me. I mean, that's the misconception that we've had all this time. And I would really encourage people to please, in your thoughts and prayers during this holiday season, contemplate on the true living nature of Christ and the real meaning of the merging between Jesus and Christ, and that aspect of being a man, but being more than a man through some achievement, and how that played itself out. But another aspect I have to bring up quickly is the whole Aquarian age, and that we were reminded in the gospel narratives that the disciples of Jesus were asked to follow a man bearing a pitcher of water up the stairs into the next house. And so that's an obvious reference to Aquarius, and that is an obvious reference for those that realize to at least a 2,000-year period. Now, the period from when Jesus, through Christ, enacted these initiations in Palestine, roughly 2,000 years has progressed. And the fish, Piscean age, was the symbol of that time. And that impulse the impulse of Christ governed that 2,000-year period. But nonetheless, again, what I have to fall back on, what makes this dispensation different, the livingness, the vitality, and the potency that makes it, that much more specialized and unique, is that we're told that these disciples are asked to follow Jesus to the next house, to follow Christ to the next house, to the Aquarian age, for a 2,000-year further dispensation. And so again, this shows the livingness and the validity and the potency of the expression of what took place with Jesus and Christ working through Jesus. This was, again, unprecedented. And this revelation that took place through this giving up of oneself, this sacrificial act that, again, is our pattern to follow for us to evolve, not a pattern to follow in the sense of someone we need to fall down and worship and pay respects to because they died for us, but someone that lives for us. That is what I really want to emphasize, is that Jesus and Christ live for us, and that they are still living, and that they live in their own individual bodies, they have their own individual work, and they also are still evolving. And that may seem blasphemous to some to say that Jesus and Christ, who is the second aspect of the Trinity for all intents and purposes, is still evolving. But nonetheless, that is the nature of evolution, and it extends far past our planet, and that shows the grandness of the entire workings out, the whole mechanics of the whole process, that it is far vaster and far grander than we might perceive from just our finite human perception, that this process unfolds and takes in a very inclusive manner many worlds, many planes, many spaces of, and many levels of expression and awareness, and that they all are intimately tied together, and that this working out, it's all interconnected. There's a symbiotic relationship at all levels of this exchange that go on. And so as we exchange in a willful, understanding manner with this energy, the more we're able to provide this process some impetus, some fuel for the further refining and evolutionary process to unfold. It really is up to each individual as to how they want to exercise their will and what is their motivation in any given incarnation. It's all up to us as to how much of our time at any given day or how much of a life expression we want to offer. Now, these great solar saviors, Jesus, to me, being the utmost, the epitome of all of these and the shining example of all of these, how much do we want to follow that example? Is it something that we want to follow for an hour once a week in the pulpit in the church and then go back to our regular whatever we get back to? Or is it something we would be more concerned about making a lifestyle expression and doing our utmost on a daily basis to try to emulate and follow after the livingness of Christ? Granted that we're not always going to meet that high calling and that high standard at all times, because we are imperfect and we are still struggling along this path of understanding. But we can make inroads, we can make progress if we are diligent, if we set our face to Jerusalem as Jesus did through Christ, if we consider these concepts and what we can do to enact or invigorate this capacity within ourselves. Christ in you, the hope of glory, as St. Paul said. These words, if we really contemplate them, are pregnant with real livingness, real vitality, and real meaning. And when we take these words into ourselves, when we contemplate in our minds, and we open our hearts to the fullest with these simple words, whether that be from the Lord's Prayer or any other prayer we might be familiar with, we find within ourselves an invocation, a welling up of sensory feelings, emotions, and we can achieve and attain and maintain a point of joy. And joy is the outstanding quality of the soul that we find once we find the soul. And that is something that will be a quest that we'll continue to seek once that initial contact is made, because it is something that far exceeds any physical sensation or any whim or desire that we may have for something of the physical plane. We realize how special and how precious it is, and once we have one small taste of it, then we spend a lifetime trying to recover it and trying to, again, return to divinity, to our shared source. It compels people, and some want to go through the organized religions of the world, and they are still established and existing for that very reason, and they serve their rightful place. And there are others that seek to find, again, through this initiatory process, a more expeditious way. They seek to take the kingdom of heaven by force, and that's another aspect of this as well, that through this amalgamation, we're going to find in the future a further strengthening, a further cohesive bond between those individuals, those great individuals that have achieved much along the evolutionary path, that still look and tend to our humanity and those that work actively are those sons of men that seek to intelligently work with those great individuals. We're going to find that rapport established and reinforced and strengthened more so in the future. And this is part and parcel of what some consider the Christ consciousness. And that as we evolve and time moves forward, we see this Christ consciousness pervading humanity in a more intimate level, more so and more so. And that it takes place in a gradual process, by gradual means through a gradual process of unfolding. But certain things accentuate it, and one would be, in particular, the harmonic concordance that just took place recently in November. These potent points of alignment allow for us to bring in energy that we would not be able to bring in ordinarily. It's a cyclic thing, and it's also because of the numbers of people that work together collectively, this group working together. Group working and the group mentality and synthesis is the overwhelming key capacity or keynote of the Aquarian age. And so we're going to see this capacity or this leaning or this compulsion to work in a group formation more so and more so. And then we'll continue to see all things tending towards group mentality. And that is the divine impulse. It's just being manipulated in some respects and being twisted and diverted to not the best interest of every individual by certain individuals. And that's something that we have to keep in mind as well. But in spite of that, the evolutionary process moves forward far greater, at a far greater level, and much more living and potent capacity than people could even really fathom, in all honesty. If we could just realize that and tap into it, we could understand more so that we have this ability for this Christ consciousness, so-called, and that's going to be, again, the keynote of the Aquarian age, the dispensation for the next 2,000 years, and it's going to demonstrate for us what we have to look forward to and what we can intelligently work for in the sense of group working together, coming together in cooperation in a spirit of goodwill and right human relations, in a spirit of sharing that can lead at some point to peace. And that is a pretty high tall order, but excuse me, we can start to make inroads little by little if the intent and the motivation is there. And so this Aquarian age, this continuing unfolding of the Christ nature and this synthesis is going to again allow for more individuals to take initiation, so-called. The initiation process will unfold to the point where group initiation will be the order of the day, and that will be the keynote of the future as well. Group initiation, people that are amalgamated and aligned for certain reasons due to their energy that they themselves express, and so they make a proper unit collectively that would work intelligently and would be proper for, again, a group initiation, a group coming together for a group expansion of consciousness. And that will be the keynote of the future. And we'll see how the Christ consciousness will compel people more so in this manner, and that also this will allow Christ himself, Jesus himself, and other so-called masters to continue to propel and complete their own evolutionary unfolding. That our group coming together will allow for a buoyancy or an uplifting that will help lift them even, in a sense, to further and loftier heights and greater fields of service. It's all these things are right on the brink of the horizon. It's just a matter of us contemplating it a bit and understanding and looking out and looking out in the world and seeing how things play out through the news and how men are acting and reacting. We can gauge much by just a little study, educating ourselves and studying how things are playing out, and then we can understand from our intuitive unfoldings and our meditations and contemplations and prayers and aspirations how we can play our part and how we can intelligently see what exactly is going on, who's zooming whom, and how we can either be aware of it or hopefully jump off the fence and jump right into the battle and be on the battlefront of how we can express our Christ consciousness, or how we can exude that livingness, that living expression of Christ, rather than contemplating a dead corpse that's hung out on a piece of wood, which is not the intent of Christianity by any stretch. So let me go ahead and grab some calls and see what's going on this evening. Hello, caller, you're on the air. Caller?
Hello?
Hi, I can't hear you that well. Go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yes, I was listening to what you had to say, and what you said was real. It was real. It was relevant. But here's my question.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about the reappearance of the Christ,
Mm-hmm.
according to the scriptures, it says, right, I'm going to read it real quick. According to 1 John, the first epistle of John, chapter 4, verse 3, and it says, and every spirit that confesses not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is not of God. And this is the spirit of the Antichrist, who you have heard that is to come even now, is already in the world. Now, right behind you, you have some pictures of a European-looking Jesus. So if Christ is supposed to come back in the flesh, according to the scriptures, who should we look for? Should we look for...
That's a wonderful question. I'm going to let you go on that note. Don't look for a long-haired white guy. I would not recommend it. Don't look for a Jewish guy. Jesus, the man who we saw be the vessel for Christ in Palestine 2,000 years ago, has finished that work and has moved on in his own evolutionary process. And so Jesus, the man, still walks among men in his own way, not very publicly, just in the sense that Christ, in a physical vehicle, can and does work in his own way at a very high state. Now, he has the capacity to generate for himself, as I spoke earlier, a body of light that will suit his purposes for what he would need to do in order to reappear in a physical sense among the sons of men. This, I feel, will happen, but there has to be that firm foundation laid by those individuals that are represented by the community in Philadelphia in Revelation, and that these individuals coming forward with this Christ consciousness lay the foundation for any real reappearance in the flesh. Christ could appear any number of ways, and that is why we're asked to keep our guard up and to not, when you see the homeless guy digging in the garbage, or when you see whoever, keep an open mind. That's what keeps us honest and keeps that sense of love for all humanity, all things, that unconditional love, that agape love, that keeps us in that frame of mind, because we're looking at everyone as the potential Christ at all times. And if we can go forward with that intent in mind, I think we can all do much. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great, and you?
Good, thank you. Do you have a question?
Well, a question in the form of a statement. I've been reading a considerable amount about the consciousness, the awareness, and I'm having some fragmented thoughts now, going back to the Bible when it talks about, I will come as a thief in the night, that no one knows. And my interpretation of that means each individual on this planet will know in his heart what that is.
Yes, that's what I agree as well.
And also I've been reading a lot about the actual birth of Christ being in the month of July in 7 BC and not in the 25th of December, which is, in my opinion, was a political thing about the early church. Do you agree with that?
I don't know about the July. I've also heard that the Epiphany, so-called, which is I think it's January 6th, if I'm not mistaken, has also been attributed as the actual day of birth. One interesting thing you might want to consider checking into if you have an opportunity, Edgar Casey and Jesus and his Church. If you can track down that publication, it has a lot of interesting information that pertains to the birth and the tradition of the so-called, of the Essenes, which is allegedly the group that Jesus was born into, according to esoteric tradition. And his writings tie in intimately and integrally with esoteric science, what's been expressed about that actual birth of that individual and the significance of that individual.
With some of my information I have been getting from Adrian Gilbert and his writings, Signs in the Sky and The Magi. He's an English author.
He sounds somewhat familiar to me.
And it sounds very validating because of all the history, his research.
Well, I'm going to let you go because I have a few more
All
callers.
right.
But your point about trusting your heart and falling back on what you feel in your own heart is the key. That's what you have to go by first and foremost, your own intuitive understanding, and all else will follow after that. But please, yes, trust your heart and your own intuitive feelings on things, and you usually don't go wrong in that sense. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Hey, Corey.
Hey, what's up? How's it going?
It's FBU. How you
I heard
doing?
about that. Go ahead. Yeah, I'm doing well.
I'm just going to make a few statements. I'll
Okay.
try to be real brief. Don't take up too much of your time. I was remembering 2 weeks ago you had your guest Don Teeter
Yes.
talking about the mushrooms. I was going to ask you, do you necessarily have to have evidence of something to believe in it? Because he said that he didn't believe in the soul because there was no evidence of it. And when I asked him, well, then why do we have all these emotions and why do we feel compassion towards people when they're down and if someone dies? And he said it's all chemistry, which I don't quite believe. But he says there's no evidence of the soul existing. And you say yourself that you believe in reincarnation, even though there's no evidence of that as well.
No, I disagree. Let's go. There's evidence for the soul scientifically. If you choose to believe these certain scientific researchers, what they've discovered that certain things like the weight of the body upon being deceased, and some people contend that that's a bunch of hooey. Reincarnation, there are many instances, they're just not very well publicized. Believe me, my friend, the establishment does not want you to adopt the concept of reincarnation in your life because, first of all, you'll have no fear. You'll have no fear of death because you'll know you're just going to come back in another body and you'll be able to pick up the torch and go on from there. You'll come back stronger, better, wiser, and more capable of kicking the tail of those that might have taken your life if that gets to the point, So that's why there's no reason to fear. Also, just even Jesus, he spoke of his disciples ask, Master, was this man, they're seeing a blind man, they're asking, was this man born blind because of his sins or his father's sins? And they're speaking about a pre-existing condition. How can you, if you're being born blind because he sinned, well, he had to have sinned previous to the birth in order to be born blind. And that's just one example that's veiled, but there's so much that really point to that. You have to just, again, open up your own heart and ask what you feel is right. If reincarnation is something you can't embrace, then leave it alone for the time being until you can get some further substantiation for that. But if it's at least gnawing at you, then maybe there's a reason why that is. So I would consider that. Hello, caller, you're on the air. Hello, caller.
Hello?
Hey, how are you?
First of all, I was wondering if you could touch your nose just so I know that I'm really speaking to you.
Yes?
I went to I think I might have done a bad thing, but then again, I don't know if it is a bad thing or not. I was just wondering if you could help me out.
Hey, brother, I'm not sure if I'm following you either, neighbor. Have a nice evening, though. Thanks for your call. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Hi, I might put you on the spot for a second here.
Go ahead.
In your opinion, who do you think Jesus the Christ is, in your opinion?
What do I think? Or where?
What do you think about Jesus the Christ?
In what respect? There's a lot to think.
Well, who do you think he is, if I may put it like that?
I feel that he is, Christ, according to what we hear in Scripture, is the teacher alike of angels and men, or he is also the elder brother in the race of men. According to esoteric tradition, Christ is, if you're running the human race, he has accomplished more than any other one single individual, because he was human like we were, and he still is human, although he exemplifies a very refined, divine aspect of our humanity. And that's why he still stays behind to be the way shower, to have the office of Christ for our benefit. It's a part of the evolutionary process and part of service, the process of service that ties in intimately. And so when we consider that aspect, that's what I feel Christ is, and there was a relation to all these previous so-called solar saviors, Krishna, not Krishna rather, but because there's another unique relationship between Krishna and Christ, I feel as well. And I feel that the great individual that came forth in the Hindu dispensation as Krishna also came forward as Christ. They're one and the same individual. And so that's a bit of a unique thing as well. So when we think of Krishna, that's a bit of a difference there. But nonetheless, that these individuals have been impressed by this Christ, with Christ, his energy, and they've followed some example of divinity in active expression among the sons of men. And so as we move forward through the evolutionary process, we have an opportunity, because Christ is moving closer to our humanity through these various means, that we have an opportunity to be like Jesus through Christ, and follow that example as it's spoken of in the gospel narratives. So essentially, Jesus is the pattern, Christ is the power, if you can understand it in those terms.
Yeah.
And that relationship allows the example for us to follow and shows for us the significance of the potency that we can make ours in our own life. We can also be that vital and that potent as Christ is, not now, but in the future if we keep evolving. It's just up to us, really.
Okay.
But I'll have to let you go with that note, but thanks for your call. I do appreciate that. Caller, you're on the air.
Hey, Corey.
Hey, what's
Okay,
up?
let's just say that reincarnation is a real thing. Have you ever
Okay.
thought about the fact that if everyone believed in reincarnation, there would be total, complete chaos because no one would have morals or values because they wouldn't have a fear of death?
Have you ever met a Buddhist before? Have you ever met a person that practices the Hindu religion before? These are some of the most gracious, open, allowing. They don't talk about fag bashing or anything like that. I don't understand it, but they're into loving and they're into compassion and the things that Christ through Jesus allegedly exemplified. There are bad Buddhists. There can be bad Buddhists, bad Hindu practitioners as well. But nonetheless, there's a quality that pervades the people of those religions that do believe in reincarnation that I think is sorely lacking in so many Christians. Christians only think of things in material terms. The Eastern person that believes in reincarnation doesn't think of the body as in such material, concrete terms that they have to do, fight and claw for everything material. They feel like they can let go of the material and the dense animal nature for things that are more important, the divine aspects of ourselves. And so that's a point of consideration as well. Let me try one more talk. Caller, you're on the air, if you can make it brief. Okay, that was brief. All right, then, I guess we'll end with that fine note. Again, we won't be here the upcoming 2 weeks because of both the Christmas holiday and because of the upcoming New Year's holiday. But I will be a guest on Jeff Contreras' show, Therefore I Am, on Tuesday the 30th at 10 p.m., Channel 16. I'd like to encourage you folks to check out Chris Athanas and Reality Expander every Thursday night, Channel 16, 10 p.m. I'd like to thank my producer, Chris, for commanding the helm of the Starship Esoterica. I'd like to thank all the folks out in Austin for viewing, and I would like to please implore each and every one of you from the bottom of my heart to please consider the reason for the season. Please consider in your silent time, in your reflective and contemplative time, what exactly is the reason? What is the livingness? Consider the livingness. Don't consider the death aspect. Please consider the livingness that is alive in Jesus through Christ, and it's alive in all of us. Thanks, Austin. Have a good night.